Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am Jackie Brenner, a pre-med student who has enjoyed meeting other STEM students from all around the world through my TikTok and Discord STEM Potential. I created these STEM Potential webinars in order to combat the lack of mentorship and representation that I noticed in STEM fields. We are an online Discord that provides a network for all students to share their unique perspectives from diverse backgrounds and create strong connections with experts in various STEM fields. Discord members can act as mentors and mentees as they progress along the stages of their education while also finding friends with common interests. I would like to give a shout out to all of the members of STEM Potential team for working so hard to make this all possible. Lastly, I want to introduce Ashini. She is the Vice President of STEM Potential, who I met through the 7-year BSMD program at Penn State and Sydney Kimmel Medical College. I could not embark on this journey without her, and I feel so fortunate and proud to have her as my best friend. We will both be moderating sessions this weekend.
So the session will begin by highlighting two professionals, an allied health professional and a nurse, Mr. Enzo Peretta, and Miss Kyla Cannon. So I want to start off by allowing each panelist to give a 3 to 5 minute introduction. And Mr. Peretta, take the floor away.
Sure, thank you. So I'm Enzo. You don't have to call me Mr. Peretta. I'm 39 years old. My pronouns are he and him, and I've been in healthcare for about 20 years now. I recently relocated to Philadelphia from San Diego, California. I'm currently the Director of Radiology Facilities, Security and Environmental Services at CHOP, King of Prussia. It's the new hospital that's being built. And if you hear any snoring, it's my 9-year-old boxer, Gracie. So just so you know, it's not me.
All right, Kyla.
Hi, my name is Kyla Cannon. I am a nurse at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I work in the pediatric ICU and also on the critical care transport team. Originally from Louisiana, Arkansas area. That's where I started my career. And then I've been at CHOP for 5 years. Moved here because my wife's family is in Pennsylvania, and we live in Philly with our dog and 2 cats.
Thank you so much for those amazing introductions. So we're now going to move into the first part of our Q&A. To all of our attendees, if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will be monitoring those, and panelists can address them as they see fit. So for our first question, we can start off on a high note. So I wanted to ask, what are the best parts of your career?
I think for me, I can go first. I didn't even volunteer that information, but I think for me in leadership, and most of it's been healthcare leadership. So it's just kind of like seeing that light bulb go on, so to speak. Like when you make that difference and you are able to help, a team member or, another leader connect the dots. I don't think there's any greater pleasure knowing you're doing the right thing. You're in this for the right reason. So I'd have to say it just goes back to the best parts are being able to lead, coach, guide, mentor somebody to where they become successful and what position they're in.
For me, speaking as a nurse that's an hourly worker, starting on like the practical side, I only work 3 days a week. I have tons of time off and like room for vacation. Just a good thing to know for people that are considering nursing. Have a really good work-life balance. And then actually at work, working in critical care, I get to do a lot of things, especially working in 2 different fields and like roles. Get to use a lot of critical thinking skills. I use my brain every day. And then I also get to just go home and turn it off and not take my work home with me. And yeah, I think that I have like a really, really good work-life balance.
That sounds amazing. I think that a work-life balance is really important, even for students. Balancing like school and life is very necessary. So my next question is, who or what has been your biggest inspiration in guiding you through your career?
I think for me, it's there's a CEO. He's also on a show called The Prophet, not like profit like Bible, but profit like making money. And his name is Marcus Lemonis, and he's just brilliant as far as his strategies that he takes. Goes into any kind of business that's failing, and he kind of makes it better. He turns it around, and so I like to think that that's my inspiration. That's what I long to be like, to be able to go into any, whether it be department or whether it be a hospital situation or anywhere in healthcare, be able to turn the situation around and make it a better environment for employees, because that's who ultimately takes care of the patients, right? So it's the staff that we need to make sure we're investing in. But it really, for me, as far as an inspiration goes, besides that, it's coming from nothing. So I grew up, not poor, but like, we didn't have a lot. And so it just makes you hungry, and it constantly makes you strive for more.
I think my biggest inspiration, when I was a new graduate nurse in Louisiana, I was trained by nurses with all having like 30 years of experience. And while technology is amazing and it's definitely safer for patients and it's given us a lot in healthcare, it was really fun to learn from nurses that did everything the old school way. And it was always really inventive and creative how they chose to like just the solutions they chose for things. And I still like really value that and try to like pass that on, because it's like kind of being lost in the new world of healthcare, wherever there's a scanner and there's a computer for everything. And sometimes those things break down, and then like, what do you do? And so I've always been really inspired by the old school nurses that do things the old way and have so much to pass on and teach to the newer generation.
Yeah, I think that's really important, looking up to your superiors or people who are already in the field to figure out how you can fit in. Awesome.
Yeah.
So on a little bit of the opposite note, so we talked about what are the best parts of your career. So my next question for you both is, what's the biggest obstacle that you have faced in getting to where you are today?
I would say for me, I mean, I know I'm now 39 years young, but it takes in especially like the larger kind of corporation you go into it. This is maybe it's getting better, but I know for a long time it was, people don't take you seriously when you're younger.
Mm-hmm.
And you really have to work. You have to do your due diligence, like just kind of prove everybody wrong. Like, you know what? Nope, I'm meant to be here. And how you lead by example or how you carry yourself. And eventually you get there. And this is my first director position. And that's hence the reason why I would come from California to Philadelphia. And, I knew it was what I wanted. And you just, every day you strive for that, and, prove everybody wrong. Like, you know what, just because I'm young doesn't mean I don't know what I'm doing, and I can make this happen.
The biggest obstacle that I've had as a new graduate nurse and as my first job, I worked in a small PICU in Louisiana, and it was part of the overall health system, but there was one floor dedicated to pediatrics. The rest was an adult hospital. We were really small. It was kind of the Wild West out there. And then I came to CHOP, and it is huge. And I went from being one of 30 nurses on my unit to one of 350, where like, it's hard for people to learn your name. It's hard to like meet people. Also went from having not a single policy and procedure written anywhere to having literally a policy on, I mean, emptying a catheter, like just anything you can imagine. And it was quite the learning curve to go from being a big fish in a small pond to a very, very small fish in a very, very big pond. But yeah, it's been a learning curve, but I've adjusted to it now, and it's pretty cool. See the level of care that CHOP's able to provide because of all of their policies and innovations and stuff is pretty spectacular, and that's how they got to where they are now.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I'm glad to see that you guys have overcome these amazing obstacles and have gotten to where you are today. That's very impressive and inspiring and motivating. So now to move on to like a little bit more of a mental health discussion. So I know that mental health is a big issue for healthcare professionals and just STEM students in general today with burnout and making sure that you have a good work-life balance like we talked about earlier. So my next question is, how do you both deal with burnout and what helps you stay motivated?
Yeah, it's definitely super common in the healthcare field, especially with just being in a pandemic. I think a lot of organizations did a really great job of trying to keep as many staff members as they could, and then continue to recruit for what was needed. And the whole time, I mean, while a lot of people were unemployed, healthcare kept going, and healthcare was at the front of everything, managing it all. And so burnout is definitely in our language that we speak. And so I think it's just so important. Like I have been horrible with this before, where I have no balance and I just give work everything and everything else goes to the back burner. And I realized a couple of years ago, especially, like as you climb the ladder, work is always going to be there. Like you're never going to have an empty desk at the end of the day. So stop whatever you're doing, get to the gym, do what you got to do to kind of, decompress. I notice coming to CHOP with my long days, like I'll have like 15, 16 meetings a day now with trying to get a hospital to open. So what works best for me to decompress is just get it done in the morning, go for a workout. And then I try to do it every night. But I do like some kind of meditation too. And I think that helps me really keep everything in perspective and make sure I'm having that work-life balance.
I think this was the question I was most excited to answer because I told my boss probably a month or two ago that I would wager that I have the least burnout of any nurse in the hospital. And that is because I fulfill so many roles and have so many hats that none of them get too heavy because I change them all the time. And that's something that I would really recommend to anyone that's capable. Obviously, if you're a manager, you can't just be a manager of 10 areas. But if you have the ability, and I think the best way to avoid burnout is pick whatever you love. Like I love critical care. And then I work in like 5 different areas of critical care, and I'm not in any of them 100% of the time. And so if I am burned out in the PICU, for 2 days, well, that's okay, because then the next day I'll be in transport. When I come back to the PICU, I have like 3 or 4 different roles I'm in the PICU. And so I just find what you love and then try to do as many things as you can in it within reason, without, sounds probably not great advice, but without giving 100% of yourself to anything, because then you're just not 100% weighed down ever.
I see. Yeah, that's really good advice. I think it's definitely easier said than done, but something to live by for sure. And Enzo, you talked about meditation. I think that I know Jackie is really into meditation and mindfulness, but I am too. And I think that meditation and mindfulness are really good ways to de-stress as well. So yeah, I mean, I totally echo what you said about that. Okay, so as our next question, a little bit more general about how you got into your career. So my next question is, how did you choose your field of healthcare and why?
Sure. So I actually, 20 years ago or a little bit more, I was actually going to school for marketing, and I was working at a place that did like desktop publishing, and I did graphic design. And so it was right around the time of 9/11. And so I had ended up losing my job because they were like, can you work, like 9 to 5? And I was like, no, I go to school. So I was laid off, and then I had to go to urgent care because I got sick. And so the person who took care of me was a medical assistant, and I was like, I don't even know what this is. And so I looked into it, and a friend of mine was going to be doing the program. So we actually went together while we were waiting for the radiology tech program, and started there, went through that, and 20 years later, here I am. I've done pretty much every position as to work my way up the ladder, so to speak. And it's amazing how much you can accomplish. So I mean, it doesn't matter where you start. Just keep going.
I think my answer is probably a bit unromantic, but I tend to be a really practical person. And I had a lot of interest and things that I wanted to do. I wanted to be a vet, an archaeologist, and a historian, and all these things. So I chose the one thing that I couldn't do without a degree, and the one that would offer me the best stability and work-life balance. And nursing is absolutely that.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear. I'm glad that you both, obviously, you can see that you both love your jobs. So that's always nice to see.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so my next question, general question about healthcare, is more about how you think that healthcare and access to healthcare throughout our country will change in the next 10 years, or how you've seen it change throughout your career.
Yeah, so I think, in the next 10 years, as I look at it, I think AI or artificial intelligence will become a big thing, like, using robotics more and more for like clinical workflows and maybe even clinical tasks. Not that we won't ever need nurses, because I think we will. That human connection is so important. But I think that will help. I think that will increase with, the next 10 years. Um, I can say it's definitely changed a lot. Just in 20 years, I can tell you there's been so many changes just from, I remember when actually HIPAA first came out, which is, insane to think of, how privacy has really been played a huge part of healthcare, nowadays.
I guess I don't know if this is more of a hope than a vision for the future, but I hope that access to healthcare is what changes, and that we don't see the quality of a patient's care being dictated by their insurance or lack of, and that we see hopefully a push towards preventative medicine over just reactive medicine.
Yeah, I think to echo what you said, like preventative medicine, I think it's up and coming and definitely is getting more popular nowadays and hopefully within the next 10 years as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think that concludes our Q&A portion about your career. So we're going to move into the Q&A portion about LGBTQ and STEM and diversity. So my first question to you both about this topic is, how do you achieve leadership roles as a part of the LGBT community, and or what did you have to do differently than your peers?
Yeah, so I think that's easy for me, because I think the one thing you can do is always be yourself. Like, it doesn't matter. I've never made anything about whether it be a sexual orientation or gender orientation. I'm simply me each and every day. And people usually, they can be drawn to that just, by the direction that you give, or the leadership style that you have. I think people appreciate someone who's genuine. And I'd like to think that, my education and experience has kind of paved the way for me, so that no matter what environment I'm in, um, you know, people recognize that, and not, what I choose to do on the outside of work.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think I would just build off what Enzo said. I mean, he's obviously in a higher leadership position than I am, but that just being unapologetic and just honestly showing that we're exactly the same as everybody else. There's nothing like super different about us because we're LGBTQ, that we don't really need special considerations to be in a leadership position, because we're just like everybody else.
Right.
Yeah, of course. Of course. You guys are obviously just as capable and just as qualified to be in the positions that you are as everyone else, as your colleagues. So, okay, my next question is, how has being a member of the community impacted how you have approached healthcare?
So I think for me, it's helped me be more empathetic and compassionate. I know firsthand what it's like to get treated, differently, right? Or to be more vulnerable in a in a healthcare setting. And so it's really helped me lead by example, and also help educate the staff on like why it's so important to display that kind of empathy, or to have that kind of empathy and that kind of compassion, because you never know what somebody else is going through until you walk in their shoes. And so that's how it's helped me in kind of a leadership role.
Well, Enzo stole my answer. That's what I was going to say. It's obviously true that when you're a bit, you just have to be a bit more careful with how you act around others. And I think it allows you to be more empathetic. On the flip side, on a more maybe negative note, I also tend to be much more cautious than my coworkers with what I share of my personal life with my patients' families, because I don't really know how they'll react, or if they'll be uncomfortable with me taking care of their kid or whatever else. So I think that also is impactful. And, I don't think that most of my coworkers would understand that I don't just say, oh, my wife. I generally say my spouse is an engineer, or, until I know that family is going to be okay with it. I think that's definitely different than what other people have to consider working in any field, honestly.
Yeah, for sure. That's very interesting to hear about your guys' experiences in healthcare. So a little bit more, or sorry, no. So my next question is, how does being a member of the community affect your daily life? And would you feel comfortable expanding on that?
I think for me, it's just a part of it's a part of me. So it's my everyday life. I live it, breathe it, right? There was a time where I wanted to just go under the radar, not be known for anything, not be questioned about anything, just be seen as Enzo. And I think moving here, coming across the country to Philadelphia, I saw this as this is an opportunity to really make a difference. And when you work for an organization like CHOP, who is just so supportive in so many ways and promotes diversity and inclusion like no other company I've actually seen. And I've even worked for Kaiser Permanente, who's huge, from Hawaii to Washington, DC. But I feel like CHOP's, I don't know, methodology on it all and just support and is great. And it's actually helped me to open up and embrace this part and use it like I said, if I can kind of pave the way, then that's what I'm going to do. And I think in my position, it allows me to be able to do that. And I truly believe that this is my purpose. And this is kind of, I truly believe like everything happens for a reason. I'll probably say that a couple times in this session, but I do believe that's why I'm here, and that's what I'm here to do.
Yeah, kind of just off of like what I said a little bit earlier, is that I just try, well, one, I'm more aware, I think, because I'm a lesbian that works in a female dominated field. So I tend to be like really aware of my interactions with people, just out of concern that, things could be read the wrong way or whatever. But I also tend to be, it was also my train of thought. Aware of like how I'm representing the LGBT community and making sure that like I don't play into like stereotypes that people have, and try to honestly just show that we are so similar, that I live like this boring life that's really similar to everybody else's. And I think that that's actually really important for people to see, that it's not, always people yelling with rainbows tattooed on their face, nothing wrong with that, but it's not always that. And that most of us are just going to work and going home and going to the grocery store, and we're really just normal. And so I try to just lead by example with that and make my life seem like not a big deal at all. It's pretty boring.
I just want to say something about that too, because with this question, like as I talked about CHOP being so supportive, my last organization, they, as certain things were kind of becoming relevant, and, that they had to start having education for employees, because they didn't have any education on anything. And so they they created, and they were supposed to kind of like, you know, just as an LGBTQ member slash, you know, person who, you know, supports that, they were going to take into consideration like my opinion. And then nobody ever asked me. And then the slide deck came out, you know, for the education course. And I remember going through it along with all the other staff. And it had pictures literally, it's so crazy. It had pictures literally of like people skipping around like with yellow, like rainbow socks and rainbow paint on their face. And like, that was it. I was like, it's not pride every day. Like, you know what I mean? Like, why does everybody think this? But it kind of gave, I don't know, I don't want to say negative connotation, but it was misleading. Like, you know, it's no different than anything else. Like, you know, we live our lives just like anybody else, and aren't necessarily, you know, not roaming down the halls in the critical care unit, you know, with a rainbow flag. But I feel like that's what people think sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's just to echo what you guys said. Yeah, I mean, you guys are obviously just normal people doing your job, living your daily life, and I think that's important to get across.
Mhm.
So a little bit more of a general question about diversity.
Mhm.
So I wanted to ask you both, how has diversity changed in healthcare throughout your career? I know, Enzo, you mentioned the education for the LGBTQ community, but if there's anything else that you would like to say.
Right. No, I think because I've been in healthcare for 20 years, I have seen so many crazy aspects of things. Just when it came to somebody being gay, for instance, it was like such a huge ordeal. Like, oh my God, did you know so and so is gay? Like, it was massive. Like, you didn't, back in the day. I mean, you might have had, I think, I don't know when Ellen came out, but it was shortly thereafter, you know, and so it was still very new. I don't think that it was something that a lot of people talked about. And then I got to see it go from that to, you know, go into another practice, or, you know, a different hospital or whatnot, and somebody say, oh yeah, like my niece has her and her girlfriend, like blah blah blah. And so you got to see it like that. But the one thing that I think has been a black hole, so to speak, for a long time is transgender patients. Um, and I mean, to the point where I have heard the terms used, like transgender wasn't it. It was transsexual, it was transvestite, it was crossdresser, mainly referring to, you know, male to female people that have transitioned, but it was never correct. And still, I mean, it's a work in progress for people to have that education. And people are wondering, you know, they ask, you know, questions like, you know, how do we roll out pronouns? Like, how do we do this? And like, again, CHOP does a phenomenal job, like just hands down. You know, they have little badges, or little cards for the badges, says he slash him, they slash theirs, whatever. And they're just on top of it. And I think, um, you know, like I said, even the place in California was like 10 years behind. They didn't have, you know, just registering a patient. I'll never forget this. They had registration problems, right? So somebody coming in the ED, they'd register them and they would say, you know, it would only be male, female as an option. There was no other options. And so they tell the person that they have to go by the driver's license, which is so not true. And I'll never forget when I first heard this. This is when I raised the issue to HR about education, because I was like, this is unacceptable. My staff was going around looking for people and they couldn't find them. Why? Because Rick's not Rick. You know, Rick is now Rosie, let's just say. And so they would, and they'd finally, you know, go up to them, and it was just, I can tell it was embarrassing for both parties, and it's unacceptable to have healthcare like that. And like I said, you know, CHOP does an amazing job all the way around, and it's definitely amazing to see it get to this level today.
Yeah, it's not even just LGBT, like CHOP has had, and I think a lot of hospitals have with the George Floyd protest. They had moments of silence at CHOP. They allowed everybody that could step away from the bedside, like all went to the field at Penn for a moment of silence. This week at CHOP, since it's Pride Month, they've hung a rainbow flag up. An email went out about it being Pride Week. I got like a little tote that has like a rainbow pretzel on it. It's Philly. Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, it was 30 years ago that the Princess Diana touched someone that had HIV, and that was like a scandal because, you know, how dare she touch like a disgusting homosexual, you know, that was not long ago. 30, 40 years maybe, to now, like he was saying, yeah, the little, you know, pronoun badges at and CHOP is probably a bit exceptional in the like where it's going, but I think that it's paving the way for other hospitals to go the same way.
Yeah, it's so nice to see that CHOP is doing all of these amazing things for the community and just really promoting diversity and inclusion. I think that's really important. Hopefully, yeah, hospitals do, or just healthcare in general follows suit. So my next question is a little bit more on the negative side, but my next question is, have either of you ever experienced homophobia or transphobia in the workplace? And if you're comfortable talking about it, please do.
Yeah, so the one thing I probably didn't mention, like with the, you know, like the intro, the bio, so to speak, is I was in the United States Air Force. So I was in the Air Force during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So I just remember, you know, sitting in a room, like, you know, you're in a typical workspace just like anywhere else, and everyone's sharing how their weekend was. You know, like my wife and I did this, or my girlfriend and I did this, or my boyfriend or whatever, and husband, whatever, did this. And I remember just having to stay quiet, having to pretend, you know, like that I either had a boring weekend or everybody was my friend. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't disclose anything, no matter what you were going through. You could be going through a breakup and be miserable, and you just couldn't talk about it. And what the craziest part is, I would watch literally guys go into a club, let's say on base or off base, and take their wedding bands off, like, and that was okay, right? But I couldn't say that, you know, I couldn't talk about the biggest part of my life. So, and, you know, and what made me truly who I am. And so that was difficult. It's not easy. I mean, again, I'm so happy that it's come all this way. I'm so happy that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was overturned. And, you know, it's even better that, you know, transgender can now serve in the military.
I nothing blatantly against me has actually happened, but when I came out to my family when I was 19, my aunt told me that I was no longer allowed to be around her 4-year-old daughter because gay people are pedophiles, apparently. So I've always been very aware of what type of family that I tell that I'm married to a woman, just not because anyone's necessarily said that to me again since then, but that I just would never want to make someone actively uncomfortable with me providing care for their child. I have been in the rooms of parents talking about gay people or listening to sermons about gay people going to hell. I've also had coworkers that haven't said anything to my face, but then of course with Facebook and stuff, you know, their views are made known, and then it's like, oh, okay, actually they do think I'm a bad person, even though they haven't actually said anything to me. So yeah, nothing directly blatant, but I definitely don't have the same experience as like my heterosexual coworkers do.
Yeah, I'm glad to see that it's somewhat progressing to be, again, like I said, CHOP is exceptional in its inclusivity, but yeah, the workplace definitely is a work in progress. So okay, so for my next question, I'm going to move a little bit more generally because Jackie actually asked a question in the chat, so I wanted to address it. So she said, for someone who wants to go into your field, Can you describe the school and training necessary, and how long does it take?
I can speak to the radiology aspect because, I'm still a tech licensed, but just not practicing anymore. So, I mean, from a radiology perspective, typically you have to do your prereqs, and it's much like nursing. You do your prereqs, and then start a 2-year associate's program in radiology technology. And then you can also, choose to do a bachelor's of science in radiology as well. So that's typical. I mean, that's pretty much it for radiology.
Yeah, so for what I do specifically, I have a bachelor's in nursing. I started with an associate's in nursing and then got my bachelor's. The associate's program takes 4 years. You need 2 years of prereqs, which is like biology, anatomy, and physiology, all of the sciences and maths. And then if you were to go straight on with your bachelor's, all in all, if you go straight through or not, it's around 5 years to get your bachelor's in nursing. The way I did it, I had summers off, but if I had went straight through, I wouldn't have had summers off, and it would have been a little shorter because you would just go to school year round. And then for my actual job, depending on the hospital, some places will not hire new grads into critical care. CHOP does, where I worked before does. I've only ever done critical care. I never worked as a med-surg nurse. You can start that as a new grad, and then you generally have to work your way up. There's a lot of like training and stuff that goes on in the job, like for like dialysis, ECMO, and all of that. To actually fly, you need about 5 years of critical care experience before doing that, because you work completely autonomous from the hospital. And depending on the place, some places, depending on like what type of care they provide, it may be as high as 10 years of critical care experience before you can fly with them.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think that's really good information for all of our attendees to hear. So thank you guys for that. So we're nearing the end of our session, but Jackie just asked another question, so that's it. She said, what is your best personal patient story? I think that's a really interesting question.
Man, that's hard, especially it's been 5 years since I've been clinical. No, 6 years since I've been clinical. I don't know if you have one first. I can go.
So mine's actually the opposite. I can't narrow it down because I'm like best like care, like medical care, or best like patient like closeness. I like literally can think of like 10 off the top of my head, so I'll do 2. The best care I've ever provided, and honestly as CHOP as a whole, it was spectacular, was a patient that overdosed on calcium channel blockers. And if anyone's in medicine will realize how just they're used to lower your blood pressure, but once you start using it as a blocker and you overdose on it, getting anything through to raise your blood pressure is nearly impossible. And we had this patient on something like 40 drips, dialysis, plasmapheresis, and definitely the hardest I've ever worked in my whole life. And there were 2 nurses at the bedside the whole time, probably 10 doctors in the room at any given time, and that patient lived. So that story is pretty cool. The flip side of that is a patient that I took care of in Louisiana that it was known that he was my patient. So if I was at work, he was mine. And just getting really close to his mom, and his dad worked, so he only got to see him on the weekends. So honestly, like I felt like a third parent to him. I saw him more often than his actual father did. Was really, really close to his mom. And there's one more. There's a patient at CHOP that anyone that works on the main campus would know that is there pretty much most of her life due to like just different stuff, but is very active and very personable and has a little wheelchair and is kind of like we call her the mayor of CHOP. And she like rolls around with a badge on a stick that she lets herself through doors and stuff. Yeah, I could probably think of many, both in the extremes of like that was insane to like, families and patients that I adore.
You know what? I was thinking, I have a lot of stories, but they're more from a leadership perspective, and so just things I've done to kind of escalate care or make sure, keeping family members in the loop, like just things like that. But I will tell you, recently, I got to a part of the Pride Month they do where you get to read a story to all the kids. And so because of the pandemic, maybe that's why they do it this way, but they have their own Seacrest studios. And so you go into the studio and the camera's on you, but the camera projects that into each patient room.
Mhm.
And so I got to read a book, I don't know, something about It's Okay to Be Different. I think that's what it was called. And so it didn't take me long to read the book and show the pictures. But it was quite an amazing experience to be able to, hopefully have been able to read, that story to the kids, and they got to see that.
Those are amazing stories, and it just makes me want to go into medicine even more. Yeah, it was honestly like amazing to hear your stories. I can't wait to have those experiences for myself one day. Yeah, that's awesome. So my next question is our final question, actually, because we're nearing the end of the session. So my final question for you both is, if you could go back in time and do it again, would you do anything differently? And if so, what would you do?
I'd say yes and no. Do I wish I had, found my true self sooner? Yeah, absolutely. But I do believe in like divine timing. Like I said, that everything happens for a reason. I think you go through everything you're meant to go through at exactly the time you're meant to go through it. And it only makes you stronger for whatever is to come. So no, I have no regrets for anything that's happened in my career or how I got here today.
Yeah, I mean, I have a kind of the same answer. I originally went to school on a full ride in Arkansas. And then when I came out, I had a really difficult time. I dropped out of school. I lost my scholarship. So yeah, I would have much less debt if I had went that route. But I also, because of losing most of my friends and family, I moved to Louisiana. That's where I met my wife. That's where I finished school. I wouldn't be in Philadelphia if I hadn't met my wife. Like it's hard to regret anything when my life's as amazing as it is today, just minus the debt.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing your experiences. I learned so much and it has been truly inspiring. And I also want to thank everyone for joining and Ashini for moderating this session. I know I've learned so much from the discussion today, and I'm excited for the rest of the panels today as well. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you for having me.